Hello, everyone. Welcome to How to Read Chinese Poetry podcast. I'm Zong-qi, the program host. In this podcast program, my colleagues and I aim to introduce cutting-edge scholarship on Chinese poetry to a broad general audience. We will present 52 episodes covering the major poetic genres developed over China's long history. Each episode features close reading of one or more of the best-known Chinese poems, with an aim to illuminate their literary greatness and cultural significance. For all the discussed poems, Chinese text, English translation, romanization, and brief notes are provided at our website, howtoreadchinesepoetry.com. By following the 52 episodes, listener will gain a bird's-eye view of the thematic, formal, and generic evolution of Chinese poetry from antiquity to the modern era. Instruct and delight is what we wish to accomplish in each talk. Without further ado, let's begin. Today, Professor Bender will present his last episode entitled Xie Tiao, The Integration of Landscape. Let us welcome Professor Bender.
After Xie Lingyun, a number of southern poets became famous for verse that similarly focused on the dramatic landscapes of the Jiangnan region, and eventually traveling through mountains and waters became a standard part of the poetic repertoire, even for poets who were neither recluses like Tao Qian nor exiles like Xie Lingyun. This routinization of landscape significantly changed its place in poetry, eventually diffusing the significant tension between the landscape and the human world that had previously defined a topic. This shift is nowhere more obvious than in the poetry of the third great landscape poet of the Six Dynasties, Xie Tiao, often called the Lesser Xie in comparison to his distant relative Xie Lingyun, the Greater Xie. Yet though Xie Tiao was also an inheritor of the once great Xie house, he was a very different person and a very different poet from his famous clansman, and his landscape poetry reflects the increasing courtliness of poetry in general, and the increasing claim that courtly poetry made upon the landscapes of the Southlands. By the time of Xie Tiao's birth in 464, the fortunes and the prestige of the Xie clan had declined significantly from its peak in the Jin dynasty. Xie Tiao, however, was recognized from a young age for his classical learning and literary talent, and he soon became a member of the famed literary salon around the Zong-qi prince of Jingling, Xiao Ziliang. Several of the Zong-qi princes were either literary men themselves or patrons of literature, and Xie became a particular favorite of Xiao Zilong, the Prince of Sui, who took Xie with him when he was stationed in Jiangling, about 160 kilometers upriver from the capital. It was on his trip to Jiangling and in the roughly 2 years he spent there that Xie began to write the landscape poetry for which he is now best known. A surprising amount of this verse, however, describes not the rugged landscape of Xie's journey or even the outskirts of Jiangling, but rather the landscape of the capital itself. Leaving for Jiangling, for instance, Xie wrote several poems gazing yearningly back at the capital glistening in the distance, and the most famous of the 10 fife and drum tunes Xie wrote at the command of the Prince of Sui, while on the road, describes the city as a harmony of natural and man-made charms, beginning with the famous couplet, "South of the river, a land of beauty, Jinling, province of emperors and kings." Xie would return to the capital after 2 years at Jiangling. In the poem that he wrote on his journey back, however, we can already sense the ambivalence that would begin to define Xie's verse after the death of Emperor Wu of the Southern Qi, and the vicious internecine fighting that followed among his heirs and among the high officials and generals of the state. Xie would spend the rest of his life conflicted in his desires, both to remain in the capital, which he considered his hometown, and also to escape the dangers of its politics.
Having for a time been posted to the provinces, by night I set out from Xinlang for the capital and sent this poem to my colleagues in the Western administration. The great river flows on day and night. The sadness of the traveler's heart likewise does not end. In vain I think how the passes are close, but in the end I know the road back will be long. The autumn water by day has shone brightly. The cold isles by night are gray. Craning my neck, I'll see the royal abode. The palace walls will look right at me. Metallic waves will beautify Jaybird Tower. The jade rope will lower on Xianzhong Palace. Yet, speeding my carriage outside Ding Gate, I will imagine seeing the sunlit side of Zhou Mound. That galloping sunglow cannot be caught, and how much worse for us separated in two different places. In the wind-blown clouds, there is the bird road, but we're hindered by a lack of bridges on Yangtze and Han. I always fear the falcon will strike, the season's chrysanthemums withering in severe frost. Send word to the fowler, in the vast emptiness I am already soaring high.
Is this a landscape poem? Certainly not if landscape is defined in opposition to court and city, as it was for Lu Ji, for Tao Qian, and for Xie Lingyun. Yet what is notable here and throughout Xie Tiao's work is the way that natural landscapes blend into, harmonize with, and lead into the human landscapes of cities. Xie knows the topography near the royal domain, and so the autumn river and its cold isles intimate to him the imminent appearance of the city walls in the distance, and he knows he will soon see its palaces glistening in the moonlight. Yet having thus been carried away with anticipation of seeing his old haunts in the capital, Xie suddenly remembers what he's supposed to be writing here, a letter to his friends back at Jiangling, expressing how sad he is to have been forced to leave them. And Xie is sad, no doubt, and moreover apprehensive that his return to the capital will be dangerous, that the falcon of court politics will strike and end his political career or even his life, as it would, in fact, just 6 years later, when he was executed at the young age of 36. We should not doubt, therefore, the sincerity of the poem's ending, that Xie truly intends to take a step back from court politics, maybe even to consider reclusion. But the poem's earlier description of the capital city, his eagerness to see its starlit towers and sunlit parks, has already betrayed the ambivalence that would characterize Xie throughout the rest of his too short life. It's worth pausing for a moment here to consider the complexity of this poem's emotion and the sophistication of the technique by which, as I've just said, it is betrayed. The poetry of Tao Qian and Xie Lingyun does not generally betray emotion. Instead, it discusses the poet's emotion explicitly, often in couplets or sections that are structurally demarcated off from landscape description. In Xie Tiao's work, by contrast, the direction of the poet's gaze and the things that he notices in the landscape often intimate his feelings without mentioning them directly. Just as the capital in this poem is a merging of natural and built landscapes, so too does it represent simultaneously what Xie Tiao sees and what he feels. This technique, often referred to as the blending of scene and emotion, would later become an explicit ideal for landscape verse, actualized most famously by the great landscape poets of the High and Mid-Tang periods, poets like Meng Haoran, Wang Wei, Wei Yingwu, and Liu Zongyuan. There are also other ways in which Xie Tiao's poetry prefigures the grand but graceful landscape verse of the Tang. The tonal patterning of Xie's work, for instance, reflects the revolutionary prosodic theorization of other poets who had written with Xie in the salon surrounding Xiao Ziliang. And like these other poets, Xie's verse is usually characterized by what his friend Shen Yue called the three types of ease, namely allusions that are easy to understand, diction that is easy to recognize, and a prosodic patterning that makes the poem easy to read out loud. Xie Tiao himself is supposed to have described his ideal poem as being round and beautiful, turning fluently, flawless as a crossbow pellet, a far cry from the difficult, rugged, and obscure style of his kinsman Xie Lingyun. Xie Tiao also prefigures the High Tang poets in his predilection for describing landscape, previously a topic for expansive, relatively long poems in much shorter forms. This next poem we will look at, for instance, is just 8 lines, the standard length of High Tang regulated verse. And though its tonal pattern does not follow all of the rules that would be established for regulated verse around the turn of the 8th century, the poem already displays the alternation of tones in the 2nd and 4th characters of each line that would be the foundation of that later form.
From the rear studio, gazing far. From lofty railings, I survey the wilds all round. Through the windows, I see lapel-like mountains and sash-like rivers. I gaze at the mountains within white clouds and gaze at waters beyond the level plain. Summer's trees have turned into draperies. Autumnal lotuses are gradually resembling canopies. I long always for gong and woe, my wavering heart like a banner in the wind.
This poem was written near the end of Xie's life, sometime after 495, when he was again sent out of the capital to serve as the governor of Xuancheng, about 75 kilometers to the southwest. Throughout this posting, Xie's poetry displays his characteristic ambivalence, his simultaneous gratitude at finding himself here in beautiful landscapes and thus relatively insulated from the infighting of capital politics, and also his yearning to return to the capital. This ambivalence animates from the rear studio gazing far, and once again it is less discussed directly than diffused throughout the poem's imagery, as all of the beautiful scenery that Xie sees from his lofty studio in Xuancheng makes him remember the luxuries of the capital. In this respect, the poem represents a striking reversal of the poetic techniques we saw employed in Lu Ji's Summons of the Recluse back in episode 22. Lu Ji, that is, had merely imagined the landscape of the mountains, and when he did so, he imagined that it contained natural equivalents for the luxuries of the capital where he was, light branches imaging a tower, and dense leaves forming a halcyon curtain. Xie Tiao, by contrast, is actually out amidst the mountains, and when he sees summer trees turning into draperies and autumn lotuses becoming more and more like carriage canopies, He is implicitly associating to the accoutrements of rank and wealth that accompanied the capital elite in banquets at their homes and on excursions. As far as Xie is from the capital has nonetheless infiltrated the landscape, and even here he can find no peace from the threats of court politics, which make his heart flutter like a banner in the wind. In Xie Tiao's poetry, then, the landscape no longer represents a visionary alternative to the human world, as it had for Jin writers like Lu Ji. Nor, for that matter, does Xie Tiao confront the landscape in its awesome recalcitrance and haunting indifference, as had Tao Qian and Xie Lingyun. Instead, Xie Tiao's landscape is humanized, both integrated with man-made space and infused with human emotions, to the point sometimes that it loses its jagged edges, its magnificent difference from the human world, and the challenges it once posed to life at court.
Let's thank Professor Bender for such a stimulating talk. This talk concludes his topic, Six Dynasty Landscape Poetry. Next week, we'll get started on topic 9, Recent Style Poetry, Pentasyllabic Regulated Verse. I myself will be the host. I hope you enjoyed the talk. Let's relax and listen to a reading of the poems in Mandarin.
谢跳，暂使夏都夜发新灵至京邑，赠西府同僚诗。大江流日夜，客兴悲未央。徒念关山静，终知返路长。秋荷熟耿耿，寒主夜苍苍。引领见经世，公至正相望。金波荔枝雀，玉绳低见章。驱车顶门外，思见朝秋阳。池灰不可接，何况隔两乡。风云有鸟路，江汉现无粮。常恐鹰隼击，时局未言霜。既言未罗者，辽阔已高翔。后摘回望诗，谢眺。高轩看四野，林有跳金带。望山白云里，望水平原外。夏木转成围，秋荷渐如盖。拱落长卷然，瑶心似悬佩。